Welcome to my talk today on studying the round complexity of secure computation protocols in the presence of a specific class of adversaries called covert adversaries. This is joint work with Vipul, Goyal, and Abhishek Jain. So what is multi-party computation, or MPC? It's a mechanism that allows parties that have private inputs to compute a joint function over their private inputs. They do so by executing a protocol wherein they exchange messages, and at the end of this protocol, all the parties are in possession of the output. Since the focus of this talk is around complexity, what is a round? A round of interaction constitutes of every participant sending a message to every other participant. And our goal is to minimize the number of rounds of interaction. Okay, this can sort of trivially be done if every party sends the private input to every other party, so we need to have some notion of security. Intuitively, security says that even if a party misbehaves, it shouldn't learn anything other than the output of the function. So how does one formalize this? And it'll be useful to see the formalization for something that we'll talk about later. So we formalize this by talking about the protocol execution as the real world, where all the parties sort of run the protocol, and contrast this with an ideal world. In the ideal world, all the parties send their inputs to this trusted functionality F, which computes the output and just returns the output to all their parties. And we say a protocol in the real world is secure if for every adversary that corrupts some parties in the real world, there is a corresponding adversary that corrupts the same parties in the ideal world. So this really drives home the point that the adversary learns nothing but the output, because clearly in the ideal world, this adversary doesn't learn anything but the output. Okay. So in our setting, we're not going to make any assumptions about the number of parties that the adversary can corrupt. So it can corrupt an arbitrary number of parties. And the notion of security that we're going to consider is called black box simulation. So what does this mean? It means that when we're arguing security, we're not going to look at the inner workings of an adversary, and we're going to treat the adversary in a completely black box manner. Okay, great. So round complexity. So what do we know of the round complexity? It turns out in the semi-honest setting, where this is sort of the weakest form of adversary, where we say, okay, an adversary is semi-honest if it behaves according to the protocol, but additionally tries to glean some information about the honest party inputs. So it turns out that one round is impossible, but this is tight in the sense that there is a sequence of work which show that two-round protocols can be constructed from varying assumptions. Okay, semi-honest is a very restricted class of adversaries. What about the more general class? What about adversaries that we call malicious adversaries, where these adversaries can arbitrarily stray from the protocol? So in this setting, it turns out that three-round protocols are impossible. And like in the semi-honest setting, this is tight, that recent works actually show that we can build four-round protocols. Okay. So we've seen round complexity of this, sort of two extreme notions of a semi-honest protocol and a semi-honest adversary and malicious adversary. So the question we really ask in this talk is, can we design a protocol sort of that spans the spectrum in terms of round complexity? What does it mean? Because we said, okay, semi-honest, we have two rounds, malicious, we have four rounds. Can we come up with an intermediate security notion which has, say, a parameter that we can sort of tune such that it goes from the 2 rounds to 4 rounds, depending on the desired level of security? So what is such an intermediate security notion? It turns out this has already been studied, and in this talk, we're going to focus on what is called covert adversaries. And these are adversaries that behave maliciously only if they can do so undetected. So how does one even formalize this? And this was formalized by this in this work by Aumann and Linden. So this is our old definition that we saw about regular adversaries, and we're going to leave the real world completely untouched, and we're going to focus on the ideal world. In the ideal world, this is what we had before, but now once the honest parties send their inputs, an adversary can send a special cheat message. Okay, on receiving this cheat message, the trusted party collects all the honest party inputs and sends it to the adversary. Okay, so the adversary is cheated and learned all the honest party inputs, but how do we formalize getting caught? Okay, so for this, we have a coin, which is flipped, and with probability epsilon, called the deterrence factor, which is a system parameter or a security parameter, the trusted functionality tells all the honest parties, hey, this adversary cheated. Right? So even though adversary learned the output, the honest parties also learn that the adversary cheated. We call this the cheating detected one, and this happens with probability epsilon. And with probability 1 minus epsilon, the trusted party doesn't tell the honest parties anything. So this is the world where the cheating is completely undetected. Okay, and in fact, in this world, the adversary can additionally instruct the trusted functionality by sending some input y to say, hey, look, tell the honest parties that this is the output. And this can be some completely arbitrary value, which is different from the actual value that would have been computed. Right? So staring at this for a second, by appropriately setting this parameter epsilon, we can go from epsilon 1, where cheating is always detected, to epsilon 0, where cheating is never detected, and sort of anything in between. Right? Great. So having talked about covert adversaries, now we can ask a more precise question, which is, what is the round complexity of MPC protocols in the presence of covert adversaries? And we said semi-honest protocols 2 rounds, malicious protocols 4 rounds. What do we know of covert adversary protocols? Unfortunately, the best known results are those that achieve the stronger notion of malicious security. So we actually don't know of anything better than 4 rounds. This is primarily because prior works focus on computational and communication complexity of the protocols rather than the round complexity. All right. So what are our results? As a first step, we show a negative result, that there does not exist a 3-round protocol. And this is, one might hope that we had semi-honest, malicious, maybe an intermediate notion would give us 3 rounds. It turns out that there isn't a 3-round protocol. Right? So 4 is sort of the best that we can hope for, even with covert adversaries. But we have a positive result. So what can our positive result conceivably be? We show a variable round protocol instead of a fixed round protocol, where the expected number of rounds are 2 plus 3 times some function f. So what about this function f? This is a function f that can take values between 0 and 1. We'll actually see what this function f is at a later point, but let's actually parse this result, assuming this is just a function that takes values between 0 and 1. Okay, so what does the function even take as input? It takes as input the number of parties n, and it takes as input the deterrence factor, epsilon. This is something that we just saw, the deterrence factor. Right? Cool. So with the value of epsilon equal to 0, the protocol always runs in 2 rounds. So if I set epsilon equal to 0, this is for like the semi-honest adversaries. This is a protocol that guarantees security only against semi-honest adversary. In this case, it always runs with epsilon in 2 rounds. On the other hand, in the worst case, for any epsilon greater than 1/2, it's always going to run in 5 rounds. So this is the worst case. And I should point out that both the best case, worst case, and the variable round, the expected number of rounds, is with respect to honest parties. This is akin to completeness, where we say, okay, look, completeness is only required to hold with respect to honest parties. And here the expected number of protocols holds with respect to honest parties. And this is important because it turns out that in our construction, an adversary, if it so chooses to always extend the protocol, can always force 5 rounds. And this is conceivably an issue, and this is something I'll touch upon at the end of the talk. But for now, let's actually look at our results. Let's start with the lower bound. So we want to rule out the existence of a 3-round protocol. And for that, the high-level strategy is the following. We want to say, okay, we want to rule out a 3-round protocol for all functionalities. So let's pick a functionality. And we're going to pick our favorite functionality, which is the zero-knowledge functionality for a specific language. So what is the functionality, zero-knowledge functionality? In this, prover is trying to prove to the verifier the validity of a statement. And it does so without the verifier learning anything about its private input. And what is the prover's private input? It's the witness for this statement. Okay. So this is, we've picked our functionality, and the next step, we're going to construct a cheating verifier. And as the third step, we're going to say, okay, look, if there exists a simulator that's able to simulate for this cheating verifier, then it must be the case that the language is in BPP. So it's only for trivial languages. So we can't really hope to have zero knowledge in 3 rounds. All right, great. So let's actually look at 2-party 3-round zero knowledge protocols. Here we have a prover Alice and a verifier Bob, and the prover proves in 3 rounds something to Alice. So the 3-round protocol zero knowledge has already been studied, and Goldreich and Kaushik in their seminal work showed that 3-round zero knowledge protocols don't exist. So then you're left wondering, so if it's already been proven, why doesn't this result already hold in our setting? And there are 2 reasons for it. So the first is that we consider protocols in a simultaneous message model, meaning that in every round, both Alice and Bob get to send their messages. So one can think of then the code cross-check result as 3-message protocol, and we're actually talking about 3-round protocols. So this gives the simulator a little more leverage in the sense that, oh, no, now Bob is not sending a single message as he was previously doing, but sending 3 messages. Maybe this gives the simulator extra power, and the simulator is able to simulate any protocol in this setting. Okay. So this is our first challenge. We have simultaneous messages. And the second challenge is that of covert adversaries. This is just the nature of the adversaries that we consider. So if at any time the simulator determines that Bob is cheating, it tells the trusted functionality, hey, look, Bob is cheating. Give me Alice's input. Right? So in that case, what is Alice's input? Alice's input is the witness W. So the trusted functionality just gives the simulator the witness W. Once the simulator has a witness W, the simulation can trivially proceed because the simulator just behaves like the honest prover. Right? So to rule out a simulator, we really need to construct a verifier for which the simulation is hard, because all of these challenges seem to enable the simulation to be done in an easier manner. Okay. To construct such a cheating verifier, we're going to consider a special class of adversaries called the rushing adversaries. So what is a rushing adversary? So a cheating Bob is said to be rushing if it can choose its ith round message after receiving the ith round message from the prover. So what does that mean? So that say the prover sends the first message, Bob can then send its first message after the prover sends his message. Not only that, a malicious Bob can choose its first round message to depend on the first round message of Alice. An honest Bob is never going to do that, but a cheating Bob can always do this. Okay. So this is the rushing cheating verifier that we're going to construct. And these are the 3 messages that Bob sends. So what's Bob's strategy going to be? So in the first 2 rounds, it's going to behave completely honestly. With this additional property that if it's executed again, it's going to use fresh randomness. So how does it do that? It sees the prover message that it gets. It sees, oh, is it a new message or is it a message I've seen before? If it's a new message, it's like, oh, it's a new execution. I'm going to pick fresh randomness and run this execution. And if it's an old message, it can like store the randomness and go back and say, oh, it's an old message. I'm going to just reuse the randomness. Right? It does that in the first message. And the second message, it behaves completely honestly using whatever randomness it's using during the current execution. Okay. So why does this make simulation hard? Recall that we're talking about simulators with black box access to the adversary. So what can the simulators hope to do in this setting, because it has no knowledge of the internal workings of like a cheating Bob? It can run the cheating verifier over and over again. So it can, what does that mean? It can rewind the verifier and execute various parts of the protocol again. So for instance, it decides, okay, I'm going to send a different first round message and see how this cheating verifier changes its first or second round message. And maybe with different attempts at the first round message, I can actually learn some information. So the verifier strategy that we're trying to construct is trying to prevent the simulator from cheating. And I want to say the intuition is here that, okay, what this strategy actually prevents the simulator from rewinding in the first 2 rounds. So why is that? So if the simulator changes its first round message, it's like the verifier just starting a completely new execution. So obviously the simulator is not learning anything about verifier then. Great. So that's the first round. It's changing the first round. It's not learning anything. What about the second round? Maybe the simulator changes the second round and then it learns something. But we said, the verifier is behaving completely honestly in the second round. So in the second round, it actually sends its second round message without even looking at the simulator's second round message. So even if the simulator changes its second round message, a cheating Bob is never going to change its second round message. Okay, so this strategy clearly prevents the simulator from learning anything useful in the first 2 rounds. Maybe the simulator can still learn something in the third round. Okay. So to tackle this, we use the following strategy, which we call cheat if cheated with. So what a cheating Bob is going to do is it's going to send its third round message only after it receives the prover's third round message. So it receives the prover's third round message, checks if this third round message from the prover results in an accept state, and then decides whether or not to send the message. So if it accepts, it sends the third round message. If it doesn't accept, it just aborts. And here we crucially rely on the rushing property because it waits for the prover's third round message before it sends its own third round message. Okay. So why does this help in sort of preventing the simulator from rewinding? It's because for the simulator to even receive Bob's third round message, it must have an accepting third round message. Right? And if the simulator already has an accepting third round message, it doesn't need Bob's third round message. Right? So we said, okay, it's not learning anything useful in the first two rounds, and it's not even getting the third round message. Obviously, the simulator can't learn anything. Okay. But the one thing that we haven't completely ruled out is, we're in a covert setting. So maybe the simulator tries for a while, gives up, and says, oh, look, Bob is cheating, give me Alice's input. Okay? And the point here is that in the real world, because we've said, cheat if cheated with. Okay, so in the real world, the honest prover is not going to cheat. So the verifier is never going to cheat. So in the honest world, the verifier is never going to cheat. It's never going to abort. But now if the simulator tells the trusted functionality, hey, Bob is cheating, it's clearly not true. So in the real world, Bob's not cheating, but the simulator claims in the ideal world that Bob is cheating. So the two worlds are going to be sort of trivially distinguishable. So with these sort of the strategy that you define for the cheating verifier, this makes the simulation really hard. And of course, this has to be formalized, and this is done so in the paper. This is just a high-level idea, a high-level view of the cheating verifier. Great. So now that we're done with the lower bound, let's actually look at our protocol construction. We said we had a variable round protocol where the expected number was somewhere between 2 and 5. So what is this actual function f? And the function is this complex term, and as a baseline, you can see that obviously this term takes values only between 0 and 1. So at least there we go. So how does one actually come to this expression? Let's see. So the main idea is going to be that we build a compiler, we take a protocol satisfying sort of the almost minimal security requirements, which is to say that this protocol is secure against adversaries that follow protocol instructions. The only thing it can do is it can choose its own randomness. And it turns out that two-round protocols against such adversaries are relatively easy to compute. So in the compiler that we built, the main idea is the following: that we're going to initiate a check for honest behavior with some certain probability. What does that mean? With some certain probability, we're going to say, okay, look, this is my normal mode. I'm not going to check for honest behavior. So, and this I do with some probability p. What this term is not really important, but with this probability p, I run this normal mode, and this completes only in 2 rounds. Great. On the other hand, with probability 1 minus p, I say, okay, now I'm actually going to check for honest behavior. I'm going to run some expensive checking procedure, zero knowledge proofs and all of that. And with probability 1 minus p, I'm going to run this 5 rounds. And this is like the verification mode. And this 1 minus p is exactly the function that we saw before. So from this, it should sort of be clear how we get this expected number of terms, because there's no time when the protocol computes in 4 rounds and stops, or 3 rounds. It's either 2 rounds or 5 rounds. And it happens, 2 rounds happens with probability p, and 5 rounds happens with probability 1 minus p. Great. So what is the high level idea for the protocol? And the main idea is that the parties are going to decide on the fly which of the 2 modes to execute. So how does that happen? So in the first round, Alice and Bob both compute the first round message of the underlying protocol and a witness indistinguishable proof. They're going to do a 2-round witness indistinguishable proof, and they're going to send the first round of this proof. So what is the statement for this proof? We'll see that shortly, but this is the first round. So at the end of the first round, both Alice and Bob locally flip coins, and they broadcast the result of this coin. So let's say that it turns out that both Alice and Bob's coins turned out to be 0. This is where they decide, oh, normal mode. We're not going to do any expensive check. We're going to directly jump to this blue box here and compute the second round of our underlying protocol and complete the WI proof. So what is the WI proof statement? The WI proof statement is, hey, I behaved honestly. But since it's WI, there are multiple witnesses. So what is it? It doesn't really make sense for multiple witnesses for honest behavior. So instead, we have an or statement where we say, okay, look, I behave honestly or something. And what this something is, we'll come to momentarily. But at least when both the parties' coins output 0, here it's 3 rounds, but it can actually be squished into making it 2 rounds. The point is that it's not doing any expensive check. Okay, but what happens if any of their coins turn out to be 1? And if that turns out to be the case, then both Alice and Bob decide, okay, look, now we're going to do this expensive check. They're going to run like 4 rounds, 0 knowledge, and Alice is going to prove to Bob in 0 knowledge that behaved honestly, and Bob to Alice similarly. Okay, so I left this WI statement hanging. So what's the OR bit of the statement? So it turns out in order to simulate, because they're not going to be behaving honestly during simulation, you need a trapdoor. So the WI proof is, hey, I behaved honestly, or I have a trapdoor. So how does that work? So Alice and Bob both send the trapdoor information in the first round, and the WI statement is, hey, I behaved honestly, or this trapdoor is true. Okay, so now I allowed the simulator to use the trapdoor, but what prevents the cheating Alice from using the trapdoor and not behaving honestly? To counter that, you can see now that the 0 knowledge has 2 conditions. That one is that it behaved honestly, and 2, that the trapdoor is false. So here you can see sort of conflicting statements being proved in the 0 knowledge, where you prove that the trapdoor is false, while in the WI proof that you prove that the trapdoor is true. So what is the intuition here? The intuition is that cheating Alice must make a choice at the end of the first round without seeing the coin tosses, whether to set the trapdoor true, and if it sets the trapdoor true, it can cheat in the normal mode, or it sets the trapdoor, but if it does set the trapdoor to be true, then it's going to get caught in the 0 knowledge, because the statement is no longer true, so it can't hope to convince the Bob of a false statement. Right? So this is the intuition that even though we've put in this trapdoor to enable simulation, a cheating Alice won't be able to use it. Okay, but obviously this doesn't quite fit into 5 rounds. This is a high-level idea. You're going to have to parallelize some of the rounds and make sure everything sort of works out. And there are several simulation challenges. For 2 rounds, in the best case, we actually need a slightly stronger security notion from the underlying protocol that we call free simulation. It turns out some existing protocols already satisfy this notion. Then there are the typical non-malleability issues that come in when you're constructing protocols in a few rounds. And the third that's most important is something that's unique to our setting, is that the skewed distributions of transcripts. Because even though we said 2 rounds happen with probability P and with 5 rounds is probably 1 minus P, we saw that the adversary is the one who says, oh, this is the value of my coin toss. Cheating adversary can skew the distribution in whatever manner it wants. And you have to be careful with how you simulate it to make sure that the distribution of transcripts sort of remain the same in the real and the ideal world. Okay. Lastly, this is something that I said I'll touch upon. An adversary can always force worst case of 5 rounds, and it can do so without being caught, because there's no way to verify that the adversary tossed it coin honestly. So let's ask a simpler question. Can we hope for worst case 4 rounds? And it turns out that similar ideas actually might work with current 4-round protocols. But given the complex nature, it turns out that you have to really fiddle around and make sure everything goes through. But we believe it works. What about an adversary forcing worst case? Is this something that we can really deal with? Unfortunately, the answer to this is no. But it turns out that if an adversary is forcing 5 rounds in the worst case, then it's always going to go into the verification mode, meaning it's always going to have to prove honest behavior using 0 knowledge. So if it's cheating, it'll get caught. So it's sort of in the adversary's best interest to not force the worst case and hope that all the other honest parties also don't want to go into the verification mode. So then it can actually cheat and get away with it. So while we can't rule out adversary forcing worst case 5 rounds, because it can always choose to do so, we are hoping that rational adversaries are not going to do that if it wants to cheat. Great. So that brings me to the end of my talk. We showed that there exists protocol with some expected number of rounds which vary between 2 and 5, and also that there doesn't exist a 3-round protocol. Great. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, please free to send me an email. The ePrint version of this paper should be up by the time the conference starts, but you can also ask me questions during the conference. Thanks a lot for listening.